Can you just introduce yourself? Tell me a little bit about you, your name, pronouns, and identity.
Yeah, my name's Chloe. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a youth worker and community organiser from Birmingham, but living and based in Manchester.
So, as an organiser, when did that start?
Being an organiser started when I moved to Manchester because my partner at the time was involved in setting up Rainbow Noir, which is the group I co-lead now, which is an LGBT group for people of colour. And so yeah, she lives in Manchester, I live in Liverpool, and she'd met two other Black queer women who were also just fed up that Manchester didn't kind of have a space for LGBT people of colour and kind of wasn't trying to listen. There was a couple of events that they all went to where they were just really frustrated about the kind of erasure of our identities and the kind of just lack of awareness and energy in wanting to do anything about it. So they met a couple of times and just decided to do something themselves. So all of the like planning happened without me really. And because my partner was involved, I just happened to be at the first one. And I was studying community drama at LIPA in Liverpool, so kind of my skills were about facilitating and like running games with people. So I remember like helping with like the session plans of Rainbow Noir. Like I remember like we did some drama games, which now just feels jokes because like I can't imagine. Well, Rainbow Noir is so big now, I can't imagine that then. But people just went with it. It was quite cute actually, because I was just like, oh, just out of uni, let me use my skills. So I kind of just fell into organising, to be honest. And then my partner got a PhD, like scholarship funded PhD year in Brighton, like a year later, or it might have been later that year actually. And then she moved to Brighton. We split up. We're still good friends. It's all good. So I just stepped into her role basically. It's just like from the beginning of Rainbow Noir of being involved, and I'd say within the first few months is when I kind of actually got involved more concretely as an organizer. So yeah, it was like accidental that I kind of just fell into it, and then it like 9 years later I'm still here.
Yeah. So like kind of getting thrown into it and kind of falling into it a little bit, as you said.
Yeah.
Did you have like what was it like at the beginning? Did you have goals and hopes for when you kind of like started that process? What was that experience like?
I guess so. Like again, like those, I guess that was at the first session where we talked about what we wanted. I think there was a mixture back then of like people wanting to get involved in kind of activism and also just people wanting to meet people. So that aim has never really changed really, as like our kind of want to just create a space for people to connect and be that's ours, and it's a closed space and kind of led by us. So I think that was the number one aim, and I think like back then there was just a bit more of a drive towards activism as well, because there were less people that cared about racism. There were less people who were just invested in like listening and wanting to change. There was a lot of defensiveness about, you know, we are doing enough, or, you know, and it's like, well, clearly you're not. So there was, I feel like at the beginning there was more of a sense of like activism being quite a key driver in Rainbow Noir. So I remember, we were probably a bit more angry, like, or just a bit more, you know, like charged in that way to make things change. You know, so much has changed since then, and I feel like for lots of reasons we've kind of become a bit more chill, which is also about our mental health, to be fair. But so there was a bit more of an energy of that. And I remember towards the beginning as well, there wasn't really any support for LGBT people seeking asylum, and so there was quite a big period of a time where there was quite a number of people seeking asylum who attended the space as well. So I think like that also shaped some of our activism around supporting those people, but also just, I guess, learning more about that experience, which for all of us, we haven't really, you know, got experience of what it's like to have had to fled a country and then end up in the racist UK and be having a crap time here. So there was that informed, I guess, a lot of our activism towards the beginning as well. But yeah, there's so many more people doing things now, which I think is also why some of the activism kind of edge of Rainbow Noir is quietened down, I guess, over the last few years, because, you know, so many more people are actually fighting for what we were fighting for, so we've been able to take a bit of a step back,
share that responsibility a bit.
Yeah, and really, like, as it's growing, there's so many expectations on like what we could do, and it's like, actually, you know, the more it's grown, the more time it takes to run the spaces that we do, the admin involved. And I think for us, if we were doing that and also fighting and writing angry emails and calling people out or calling people in, like, we just would burn out. So for us, we've kind of taken a focus of our energy to just putting it into the space and making the space a really, you know, accessible and cool place for people to connect in. It's not to say we don't get involved with activism, or that creating our space is an activism in itself, but yeah, I guess our focus is more in trying to keep Rainbow Noir going and growing, really.
Mentioned a few things, kind of just like how Rainbow Noir started, and then, you know, kind of the angry emails and the other aspects. Could you just explain a bit on kind of the different ways the organizing has looked?
Just having the group in and of itself, I feel like, was our initial part of organizing, like getting the space that was led by and for LGBTQI people of color. It was like, that felt like a big thing. It was like, oh, it's a closed space. Yeah, so yeah, creating the space felt big, and not everybody really understood why we needed a closed space. I think there were odd comments here and there about it being closed. Just being in meetings, like, it kind of really, it all fell into place also because I got a job working for an LGBT organization, so I was also in rooms like representing my role there, whilst also being able to represent Rainbow Noir. So actually being in an LGBT organisation gave me like opportunities to talk about stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have had if I was just organising from Rainbow Noir. So it kind of just fell into quite a good situation, really, where I was able to meet a lot of other like leaders in the city and really get Rainbow Noir's name known, and I think like me known as well, and kind of just networking and telling people what we were about. So I guess, yeah, being in those meetings, I was able to put challenge forward about, you know, what were people doing for LGBT people of colour, what were people doing about racism in the village, etc. You know, or even going to, like, you know, the BME network meetings in Manchester and just talking really openly to people about what we did. So it was kind of good, actually, because it gave me a bit of security through my paid role to be like, oh, it's given me a bit of confidence to be able to like talk about these things. Like, I'm not just turning up as like a community organizer or activist, like trying to, you know, there was a bit of, it's not legitimacy, but just a bit of a kind of just a bit of a safety net to be like, oh, I'm here of an organisation. It just gave me a bit of I don't know, just added something that enabled me to like challenge a bit more openly, because I guess at the end of the day I was also like, well, this is also my job. So yeah, I think, and I've worked for a few LGBT organisations in Manchester, and both roles have enabled me that platform to really just be loud. So I think, yeah, a lot of the organising was coming to meetings, bringing up stuff in meetings, going to Pride. Like, I think some of our bigger visual bits of organising was just being at Pride. Like, I remember, I think it was maybe 2014 or 2015, and I made a big banner that said Black Lives Matter and took it to the Pride parade, and it just felt like no one was saying that at Pride, and I remember like there was a mix of like people really clapping for the sign and then people just being a bit confused, and it was interesting because it's not to say that like the parade wasn't political in other ways, but I think it was a bit sanitized a lot, or people weren't used to like people bringing, you know, important messages to the parade. There's lots of like nakedness and dancing and fun, and I think people who come to watch the parade kind of expect that entertainment. So yeah, I remember that was quite a big thing, or it felt like quite a big thing, that we'd had a Black Lives Matter sign in the parade. And like, yeah, our parade entries have always got signage that's kind of been talking about racism and LGBT people seeking asylum, and yeah, that's always been one of our biggest like bits of kind of organizing, and it's also where people find us a lot of the time. Like there's 3 of us who organize now, and one of the people who organizes with me got handed a flyer by one of us in the parade. It took him a couple of years to actually come through to Rainbow Noir, and now he's an organizer. But you know, that I think our visibility in the parade, you know, was a big part of just like, well, being visible and being like, we're here and we're not going anywhere, and like we're going to take up space that we deserve, kind of thing.
I was curious, you're saying you feel that things are quite different now. I'm curious what that looks like, what either the process of the change or what has changed.
I think what's changed, I think more people just were empowered to do stuff themselves. So like there's been groups started specifically to support like African LGBT people seeking asylum, or just generally people seeking asylum in Manchester, which I think has been really amazing for that community in Manchester. There's a really big community in Manchester of people seeking asylum, and I think there was a lot of expectation maybe that we could help and support, but we definitely tried to in ways, but we weren't able to we didn't have capacity or the experience really to give specific support for that community. So the fact that groups have started up, you know, run by and for people seeking asylum was really great. And again, like, you know, one of those groups met at the LGBT centre, so there was again like really cool people in Manchester who got that you know, our groups needed space and support. I think there's just been like a global recognition that racism exists. So I think more people are just aware about you know, that narrative or what that might look like, and more like, yeah, I guess there's been more visibility to LGBTQI people of colour, just more generally in the media. There's been more groups around the UK starting up. You know, UK Black Pride is really prominent, and Lady Phil, who is the founder of and director of that, has really, well, I feel like her visibility's gotten huge over the last few years as well. So it just feels like there's been just more people doing stuff that's enabled kind of experiences to come more to the forefront. I think definitely for a while we were like a flavour of the month, flavour of the year. It felt like it was really easy to get a kind of news article, like everybody, you know, it felt like a little bit tokenized in that way. But I guess that's also been a springboard to just generally greater visibility. But I'd probably say the 2 resurgences of the Black Lives Matter kind of mobilizations have definitely impacted people thinking about race and racism a lot more, and therefore supporting groups that are happening, or, you know, doing more stuff to really think about whether their groups are inclusive. So I think that's some of the, and also just people really calling out like white institutions. Like Pride got battered last year and a few years ago for racism at Pride, and you know, there's been quite big call outs about that, like getting on big news outlets, not necessarily just Manchester Pride, and it's not just a Manchester Pride issue, to be fair. But I feel like there's definitely been more kind of public critique on kind of white institutions and how they just haven't been inclusive, and they're just very kind of white led. So yeah, I think a lot of that has been has happened over the past like decade, really.
Yeah. You've alluded to it a little bit in some of what you've been saying, but do you want to expand a little bit on what you feel is the importance of either kind of the representation, or even more importantly, I think the intersecting of identities, as you had mentioned before?
Yeah, like the visibility of them.
Yeah, kind of explain a little bit more kind of what's important about that, or what is your connection to that, or how does that get involved in?
Yeah, I guess my connection to that is like it almost feels like a bit of a cheesy tropey narrative now to be like, I didn't see me growing up, but it really but I think it really is a thing. Like, it's funny to think, God, like I felt that 10 years ago, people felt like that before me, young people still feel like that now. Like, so I think for us, you know, and there's so much more like representation of Black and Asian LGBT people now, you know, and I think the growth of social media and Instagram and TikTok, and the accessibility of like visual media and the safety of online, I guess, being able to show yourself a little bit more, like, has really kind of heightened LGBTQI people of colour visibility. But yet still people are like, well, I haven't seen me in shows, or I haven't seen me. So I feel like that representation for us definitely was why, even things like Manchester Pride, it was really important that we were in it with our messages and just in it, being loud and proud. Like, I remember the first time we did it, was just 3 of us, and we danced the whole way with these signs and just waved them at everybody, because we were like, you're gonna see us, and it's gone like from 3 people to like, I don't know, nearing 50 sometimes in our parade entry now. So that our visibility in Manchester has been really important, because also Manchester in the north is generally quite white too, and even though there's lots of Black and Asian people in Manchester, going out on the scene, you don't see many people. When you go to LGBT events, you might not see, I mean, maybe now you do a lot more, but you didn't used to. So even our visibility in the city was really important, to know that this is not something that just happens in London, which is like always how people feel, like, oh yeah, that's, and to be fair, like, I know London's massive, so it doesn't really equate, but for a while there weren't any socially focused groups for LGBT people of colour in London. Like, there were nights happening, and back in the day, definitely there's a big legacy of like the Black LGBT Centre and community organising, but I feel like definitely around the time that we started, there was a gap in that, just like chilled, sober spaces for LGBT people of colour to meet.
Knowing a little bit about what this project is about, what are your thoughts kind of on, I guess, the public perception or the public memory of like activism and community organizing, and specifically for cutie POC people?
What is the public perception? I think the public perception is that it's all American. Like, what really frustrates me is like every year, like Marsha P. Johnson photos everywhere, and like Marsha P. Johnson was amazing, but I'm like, people in the UK just are not aware of like the real rich history that existed here. Like, I think it was at one of our Rainbow Noir birthdays, we showed a documentary about the Black LGBT Centre in London, which I think was in, where was it? I can't remember where it was, but Veronica McKenzie directed the film, and it's called, oh gosh, my memory's bad. I can't remember, but anyway, the film exists. Veronica McKenzie, you'll find the film, and it's like there was a Black, lesbian, and gay centre in London, like a whole community centre run by and for Black and Asian LGBT people. There was a Black gay group that I think met at Gays the Word, I think, and again, like politically Black, so it was for people of colour. There was Nubian Rainbow in Birmingham, that was an LGBT group that existed before we did at some point. There's been so much organising. Even Stonewall, like one of the biggest UK LGBT rights organisation. Often people think about Ian McKellen starting it, but I think there were like 7 people that started it, and one of them is a Black woman. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, that history is like totally erased. So that's what frustrates me. And I'm like, okay, Marsha P, but where are people talking about the UK? And I think also when we think about the UK, Lady Phil, and perhaps the Lady Phil, she deserves absolutely all the platform she gets because she's incredible. But even that, it's like, it's very lazy. Lazy is maybe not the right word. Maybe it is actually, very, very like surface level research done into the history of the UK, because there's so many organisers as well as Lady Phil who I think need to get platformed, for what they've really done. So I think the perception of our history is just that it didn't happen, or we didn't do stuff, which is so annoying. There's really cool nights that have been happening for a really long time. There's been spaces that people have organised, organisations that people have started, and I think a lot of that, even now when we have the tools to really actually find out, archive material and talk to people, and it still feels like, that's been erased. And it's something we've been aware of as a group for a really long time, of like, oh, we need to archive what we do. And probably a lot of why the archival stuff is difficult to find is also that we're just too busy living it. Like,
Yeah.
we're not taking photos necessarily, we're not taking videos, and and I think now things are digital, you don't necessarily have paper like leaflets and things to store. And I think probably we're quite bad at thinking about archiving, or no one else externally is like, you should archive that. So I think maybe contradicting what I said a little bit, but also, yeah, it probably wasn't at the forefront of people's minds to be like, we need to archive, because we were like, we need to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's interesting, somebody gave my ex-partner gave me, so yeah, there's a Black lesbian that set up the Black Health Agency in Manchester. I think her name's Evelyn. I'm really bad with names. Evelyn something. Black Health Agency was it's called BHA now. They've kind of changed it to just the acronym. Historically set up as a Black Health organization, and my partner got given this like folder that had bits of flyers in. I think there even was like a zine or something about the Black Lesbian and Gay Centre. There was a book, Making Waves, or something that was about Black like lesbian women in the 80s and 90s. So it was like, even these like pieces of like precious archive stuff, it's like, if you don't know the person who gives, if you don't have that relationship, you're not going to get it. So I get massively excited about all this stuff. I feel like I proper geek out, like, oh my god, this stuff existed. But I feel like, I don't know, like I feel like people have really glamorized like American history, or I think for a lot of young people now, because cutie pot media and spaces are a lot more accessible, maybe they aren't necessarily thinking about like, oh, I wonder like 20 years ago like what it was like I think there kind of isn't that sense of even wanting to know, maybe, I don't know, like not widespread anyway, otherwise I feel like there'd be more of it available. But there's a really cool like Instagram called Black and Gay Back in the Day, that was set up by a group of queer Black people in London that are just posting pictures of when they used to organise and meet, and like it's just so cool to be like, oh, those pictures are actually having to be developed, like it's not like a digital picture, like it's got that like old feel. It's like, oh, these are really cool, like to see Black queer people in the 80s in parks together being queer, and meeting together and relationships, like that stuff I find really exciting. But yeah, I don't know, like I feel like I often don't meet people who are also excited about that, which is why this is really cool. Like I think archiving is just so important to be able to understand like what's happened before and the legacy of what we're doing now, and kind of where that's been started previously. So yeah, I feel like still the public perception is that we just didn't exist, or we weren't doing stuff, or we were just oppressed at home, no. That's kind of how I feel people think about us.
Do you feel like there are people you can talk to, or that you have the desire to talk about kind of like the history of your own personal memories of organizing, or just the history in general?
Yeah, I guess so. Like they often happen quite naturally. Like last week, we did like a little photo shoot for this documentary that's being made, and I already knew one of the people who started it, but I was talking to like her co-partner who started this night, and she actually is from Wales and had moved to Manchester, and that's when they started the night. So we just got talking, and she was sharing about what it's like, and I was sharing about what it was like. So and sometimes when there are older people at Rainbow Noir who've been involved in other bits of organising, like those memories get shared sometimes, just like if they happen to come up, or sometimes I'll ask if I know someone's been involved in something, or like there's people involved with Common Word in Manchester, which is a Black Canadian writers group, which is like really old, and there's always been queer people involved in that. So there's a real kind of, well, there's definitely archive material there, but also just people who've been Black and Asian queer people in the city for a while. So like, yeah, I feel like those conversations come up now and again where we're like, oh, what was it like? Yeah, but yeah, it would be really awesome to try and build more of an archive of particularly like LGBT Black and Asian organising in Manchester. Like I feel like there's bits here and there, or there's like so many people in my head. I'm like, oh, I would want to talk. I want you to contribute to it. I'd want you to contribute to it. But it's just like one of 10 million projects that we want to do. So it's like, it's really hard to kind of focusing on what the important thing is. But to be fair, it's our 10th birthday next year, so maybe that could be like something to work towards, to be like, we need to archive the last 10 years properly.
Question is just kind of wondering if there's anything else that you were hoping to talk about that you didn't get a chance to, or anything that you would like to add.
Maybe just to talk a little bit about like what happens in Rainbow Noir, so people know what to expect, I guess, when they come along. And like it's just Rainbow Noir, like, yeah, it's just always been a space to meet people. So we always have like an icebreaker where people chat and answer a silly question. There's always food to nibble. We've kind of like built a little bit of a library of zines and things that we have out. We have like board games out. We sometimes have workshops in the space. So I guess like I always look forward to Rainbow Noir because I never know what conversation is going to happen or who's going to come. Like I feel like every single Rainbow Noir that we've ever had, there's been new people that come along, and I feel like that is really cool. Like there's always somebody new. And I love that, and it's nice I think that's important to kind of share, because people often think, oh, can I go to that group, will I be black enough, will I be this enough, and like people definitely kind of come and say that they felt that, and I hope that soon goes away once they're in the space. Yeah, it's interesting that I think because it's a specific identity group, I think people think, oh, you know, you've got to be really on it with relating to your LGBT identity or know a bit more about, I don't know, LGBT stuff, or you've got to be really culturally, whatever your culture is. And there's definitely people who question whether they are enough of those things to come, which is really, I feel like it's such a common experience, but it's always really sad when people feel like that. But yeah, I hope people feel like that's not a thing once they actually get in the space and see that everyone is just so random. But yeah, to paint a picture of it, yeah, it's like a community space where people hang out, chat, play games, talk, eat food, be silly together sometimes. Yeah, it's just dead chill. Yeah, so I guess just to give a bit of space to really illuminate that, really. And now we're at the new LGBT centre, we have 2 different floors of stuff. We have a quiet room, so there's space also for other things to happen in that space. And yeah, we're hoping to start back our workshops. Over the pandemic, we did online workshops where we just got people to run stuff like creative writing workshops and like plant workshops and things, and it would be nice to get back to be able to do that, because I think that's also like one of the things that it feels like a real privilege to be able to do, because we're established as a group, we're established in the city, it's relatively easy for us to get space, we are all doing all right for funding as a group. It enables us to like just give opportunities to people. I think that's also one of the things that is actually quite a core bit of our organising, is being able to lift up other LGBT people of colour in the city into things like, oh, of course I can, you know, if people ask for facilitators, I'm like, here's a list of however a dozen, like hire them, you know, or like we're looking for dancers, or we're looking for this, or, you know, whether it's like whether we put on the workshops ourselves and get, you know, facilitators from our community to run them and they can get paid, or whether it's like telling other people about all these awesome people, like that's one of our biggest bits of, I guess, trying to increase visibility in the city, really, and ensure that, like, you know, artists from our community and facilitators and writers and, you know, are getting those opportunities. And I think we've actually got a real privilege in our platform to be able to do that for people. So that feels really cool, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds super fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I think that we will end the interview there.
Okay.